Well, it's a pleasure being with you. We get to come off the heels of Easter, and we are back in the book of Matthew for the next 4 weeks. And we're looking specifically at the miracles of Jesus. There's a string of them, as you will see, in Matthew chapter 8, 9, and 10. And they're of a variety of miracles, of natures of miracles. Some are physical healing, some are demonic oppression healings, some are of natural consequence, right, where Jesus commands things of the very nature he created. And this morning we get to look at three individuals, different scenarios, three individuals who come face to face with Jesus in a variety of manners, and they are healed. We're going to look at their characteristics a little bit. We're going to look at how did Jesus approach them. We're going to look at how did they respond. We're going to look at how Jesus responds to them and commands them after he heals them. And this week I was reading an article on a trend in social media that's called Post and Ghost. Okay, and here's the nature of it. So much of social media, if you're on it, if you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, you post something, and what do you anticipate? Really? Someone to either like it or comment on it. And there's a trend in this social media world where people now are just posting things without really checking it afterwards. They're not looking for likes. They're not looking for comments. So they're posting and then they're off. They're throwing a picture up or they're giving an update about their family, and they don't look at it. Because when you look at it, what happens? Do people like me? Do they like my post? Are they my real friends or not? Do they agree or disagree with what I've just posted? And it's an interesting trajectory in our culture. The motivation's not grounded in getting people to like your post or even comment on it as a matter of such. And it'll be interesting as we look at Jesus in his miracles that he's doing. There's kind of like a miracle and ghost thing going on here, where Jesus is healing people. He's on a healing tear, if you will, after the Beatitudes. And he's telling people, don't tell anyone. Don't say anything. It tells us a little bit about who he is and what his kingdom was about. And so, like I mentioned this morning, we come face to face with three interactions with Jesus and individuals who were healed. Each situation gives us a perspective about that person while showing us more and more of who our Savior is. And one of the dangers, I know from my own life, and you might attest to this in yours, when you read these accounts, sometimes our first reaction is this: that's so great for them. Right? We're going to see this morning, that's so great for the leper. That's really great for the centurion's servant. What a fantastic thing it is that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. But does it ever cross your mind and your emotions that you serve the same Jesus? Does it ever cross your mind that potentially Jesus wants you to bring your burdens, your worries, your anxieties, your fears, your physical ailments to him? Because if it's always, man, that's so great for them. What a great thing Jesus was doing 2,000 years ago, but we disconnect that from our own stories. We're missing out on just the fact that maybe Jesus, because he's good and he loves you, maybe Jesus actually wants you to come to him with your burdens. It's one thing to believe he had the power and the authority and a gentle spirit to heal and respond to the request to do so. It's another to believe that Christ could bear your burdens and your pains and your ailments and provide for you a hope. So as I move through the text this morning, I want you to wrestle with some questions on a personal level. One is this: what are you withholding from him? What have you not asked him maybe to address in your life, heal in your life? Now, you've heard me say this: God is not a genie in a bottle. We don't believe in the prosperity gospel of ministry. What we do believe, and you'll see it with our characters, is there's a belief enough in the words Jesus was speaking for these individuals to view Jesus with authority and then take their issues to him. And maybe you've never prayed for physical or emotional healing in your life. And perhaps it's out of maybe being ashamed of what's happened to you, or the health struggles you might have. Maybe you don't trust him enough to bear your burdens. It's quite possible that anxiety and fear can be crippling. I know that's possible. But it's also possible to believe that our Christ came to take those very things upon himself. And he declares all throughout his word that he can. We're not questioning that this morning. We're questioning, can you? Do you trust his word enough to take to him the very things inside the depths of who you are so that he may take them upon himself? So our journey starts in Matthew chapter 8. Okay? Keep in mind, Christ just wrapped up teaching what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And the text is going to tell us he's coming down from the mountain. All right, he's coming down from the mountain, and here's what happens when he comes face to face with a leper. And it says this in Matthew 8, 1 through 4, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. There's some things we need to understand about context. There's a large crowd, we can assume, that heard all of Jesus' teaching on the kingdom of God and application of it, and they are now following him down from the mountain, and they want to hear more from him. There's something compelling about the teachings of Jesus. There's something there that tugs at their hearts. And it's different for everyone, I can assume, but at the end of the day, these people, these crowds that are following Jesus, view him as some sort of authoritative figure, some sort of great teacher. And at the outside of town, which would have been adjacent to this mountain, there was a colony of lepers. Now, we don't face this much in our culture with leprosy, but let me tell you a little bit about it. If you were diagnosed with leprosy, you would automatically, in a Jewish context, be called unclean, unable to worship in the temple, unable to associate with your family, your friends, and you were technically put outside of the city gates, ostracized. And the unfortunate thing was there was no cure. So you're going outside of your world, all of who you are, to hang out with people who are at different stages of leprosy, some of them on the doorsteps of death, and that is your future. You're seeing people die in front of you. And every day, new people are coming out and joining this community of people that are unclean. Not worthy to come worship because they've been labeled such. I love what John Bloom says about leprosy. He says this: leprosy made you die many times before it killed you. If you can somehow put yourself in that position, just understand the emotional pain that happened when you got diagnosed with this disease. You died many times over before you physically were put in the ground. It was such a bleak and hopeless existence. There was nothing more shameful, nothing more self-demeaning and rejecting than this. And even if you were to wander back into the city gates, it wasn't the community in the city that was responsible to tell everyone around you, hey, this is an unclean person. You were responsible as you sifted through the community gates to say, I'm unclean. So you're walking the streets verbally declaring your uncleanness. Does that help with your self-image? Does that help with your emotional stability? No, what are you reminded of all the time in a community setting? You do not belong. And so, there's a man who's with the crowd, and he comes up to Jesus. So, just like I just said, can you imagine this man coming down the mountain with all these other clean people, and he's walking amongst them saying, unclean, 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 all the way to a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. And what does Jesus do with this man? We will see that he truly desires that the man be put back into community again. Sending him back to the center of worship, the temple, to be made publicly clean again. And this morning, I want us to recognize some characteristics of our healer as it relates to how we should respond to that. And the first is this: our healer. Christ touches the very unclean parts of us to make us clean. He's not ashamed of that. He's not pausing his ministry. There's not a bunch of qualifications. We celebrate Easter, we celebrate the cross and the empty grave, because ultimately when we come to him as unclean human beings, depraved, born into sin, we are what? We are made clean. So our response should be this: there is nothing in us that Christ can't redeem. So let his word speak over you. There's some of us in this room that have a very hard time believing that. We have a hard time believing that all those unclean parts of you can be made clean. At different parts of your life, in your past, maybe in your history, you rewind the tape, and Satan sometimes wants to make you live in that space, and you doubt the cleansing power of the blood of Jesus. So what made this leper, who was already desperate, he was already disconnected from community, what would make this leper scream through the crowd, I'm unclean, to come to the feet of Jesus and ask for healing? There had to be something there. And I believe it was he trusted the very words of Jesus. And through that, it's compelling enough to come to the feet of Jesus and said, if you will, you can make me clean. If you just touch me, you can make me clean. Regardless of what people thought. And so Jesus tells him, all right, I will. I can. Be clean. And then Jesus, this is where we see the heart of Jesus. He says, hey, don't tell anybody about it. What I want you to do is I want you to go back into the temple, and I want you to show the priests that you are cleansed. Because what does that mean for the man now? Guess what he gets to do? He gets to go home. He gets to worship. He gets to live a completely different life that he thought he had lost, and now he's reinstated into community again. All because Jesus said, I will. So we're brought to a different situation in verse 5. When he had entered Capernaum, when Jesus did, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those following him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the centurion said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed, or Jesus said. And the servant was healed at that very moment. So we've got a new character. We have a centurion man. Centurions they were kind of generals in the Roman Empire, and they oversaw about 60 to 80 Roman soldiers. They were put in different provinces where the Roman Empire had authority, and they were officers in it. And the officer apparently understood authority structure. Right? He had authority above him, and below him he understood that when he said go, his men would go. They would march. They would do things. And so once again, there's something striking that he believes about this Jesus. Now, we don't know if the centurion man overheard Jesus' teaching. We don't know how he came to this understanding that maybe I could approach Jesus and ask him for something because Jesus teaches and preaches with authority, but he does. And he goes to Jesus and he's like, hey, I have a servant, and some other texts, the servant is paralyzed. He can't walk, he can't move. I have a servant, and in our Matthew gospel here, it doesn't tell us that the centurion asks Jesus to heal the servant. Jesus says, I'll go to your house right now. And what does the centurion recognize? He recognizes his what? Uncleanness. He was a Gentile. In his home, that would have meant he had idols on the mantle. There were pagan practices. He knew Jesus, being a practicing Jew and a faithful one, could not enter his home because then guess what Jesus would become? In the Romans' eyes, unclean. But he goes to Jesus anyway. It's interesting with the centurions, they were not allowed to be married for 20 years. So they would serve a 20-year term in the Roman Empire without getting married. So the only family they had was their slaves and their men. That's it. And we can sense some compassion here in the centurion where he's almost like breaking over this, that part of his family, what he knew as family, was dying. They weren't well. And so out of care, the man reaches out to Jesus. And just like the leper, he calls him Lord. What does this tell us about our healer? Christ applauds a faith in his authoritative word to do mighty things when we believe he is able, no matter the cost. Think about the leper walking through hundreds of people saying, I am unclean, and they part like the Red Sea, and there is Jesus. Really, for the leper, more guilt and shame. more rejection. What if he doesn't heal me? Here you have a centurion who, in the eyes of the Roman Empire, the only people they worshipped were the gods of their system and Caesar. So for him, the centurion, to go to Jesus and ask for something out of authority that Jesus has could have put his job on the line, his reputation with his men on the line. So our response to that should be this: don't lack the faith to trust in what he has said, leaving room for his word to reign in your life. There's something that these two characters believed about the word, the spoken word of Jesus Christ, and they trusted him. And yeah, they were anxious, they were fearful, there were all of the other human emotions tied to that, but at the end of the day, they still asked something of Jesus. And Jesus said, I will. Jesus said, your servant is healed. And it was immediate. And it's not perfect. The centurion was a broken man just like anybody else. But despite all of that, he asks. He believes. And Jesus, he applauds it. In all of Scripture, you're not going to find a more compelling statement that Jesus gives of someone based on their faith in him. Jesus then bookends our text with a miracle centered around his touching someone who is unclean again. In Jewish law, a fever would also leave you isolated. But yet Jesus was about the Father's business. So in verse 14, Jesus enters a very familiar house, a house he would have spent lots of time in. And it says this in verse 14, after he left the crowd, after he granted healing to the centurion servant, this is what happened. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her. And she rose and began to serve him. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illness and bore our diseases. Do you think the leper kept his mouth shut? So Jesus leaves the crowd. He goes into Peter's house. Peter's mother-in-law is sick with a fever. It's a fever. We don't know how serious it is. But all Jesus has to do is go up to Peter's mother-in-law, and he does what? He touches her hand, and she gets up, and what does she do? She's making food. She's serving. Which tells me it wasn't like a crisis moment. It wasn't like the leper who had been dealing with this growing leprosy and imminent death. It wasn't like this paralyzed servant that Jesus said, I will heal him immediately. Peter's mother-in-law had a fever. But what does Jesus do? He touches her. He extends grace to her. He's not worried about being unclean himself in the eyes of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. No, he says, I have the authority to heal who I want to heal, whether you're on your deathbed or you've got 104 temperature. You see, Christ does not discriminate on what he heals. He doesn't. He doesn't play favorites. He doesn't discriminate on what he heals, and he often initiates the healing. He did it with the centurion man. He does it here. So our response, we are to trust that our Christ knows us and has Spirit-led work for us to do as we anticipate his cleansing in our lives. Why should we anticipate that? Well, because he fulfills a prophecy that tells us we should. In Isaiah, right? In the latter half of verse 17, he took our illnesses and bore our diseases, which tells us that the road Jesus walked from his birth to crucifixion was taking on the sin and the weight of the world. Darkness. He took it and he bore it, which led him to the cross. And ultimately, when he said it is finished, sin and death and the ramifications of all those things were put on the cross of Jesus Christ. Because here's the reality: the darkness, the sin has to go somewhere. Because we serve a holy God, it's got to be dealt with. It's got to be atoned for. The leprosy has to be atoned for at some point. The temperature has to be atoned for. And Jesus says, I will take it. I will bear it. And through stripes and broken body and a bleeding body, he did just that. So, is he willing? He is. We don't view Jesus as a magician. We don't view him as, well, Jesus, if you heal me, then I'll do this for you. That's not how we want to approach this. And the text doesn't advocate for that. What the text advocates for in the healings is, do you trust his word enough to bring the very things, maybe even shameful things in your life, to the foot of Jesus? Do you believe in his word enough that you can trust him with it? And you know what? You might see physical healing happen in your life. And at the same time, you might have been praying for years for healing to happen in your life and affliction to be taken away. But maybe it doesn't happen how you think it should. You might see great transformation in your life that happens in a short amount of time, or you might see incremental growth over many years. Wherever you find yourself in relation to asking for healing, whether it be physical or spiritual, we can take something significant away this morning, something that our characters who interacted with Jesus had a working and maybe even limited understanding of, and it's this: the darkness of the world was put on Jesus. We know that, we believe that, and he invites you to invite him to take and bore your weaknesses. It's an invitation. It's not an invitation grounded in, I want to see how good this Jesus is. I want to see what he really can do and what he really can offer me. That's not the motivation. The motivation is, I trust him and his word on the front end, and whatever he decides to do in accordance with the will of the Father, let it be done that way. Whether it's emotional healing, physical healing, relational healing, all of it is anchored in believing in his word and in the character of Jesus. Believing that, even if he just says the word, let it be done, it can be done. What great faith is that? In uncertainty, what great faith it is, knowing that you might even be rejected by your peers. And the true test of our faith and our character's faith in these narratives comes to meet the pavement of our lives when we don't see or experience what we want. And in those moments, all you have is his word. All you have is wrestling with, can you trust who he is? And our characters did. For sure. Will you trust his speech? Will you and I, continue to ask for his hand of healing us. You and I aren't perfect. That's why we need to be sanctified. That's why we need to be made clean. And he, Jesus, is willing to do such because he's already proven himself. He's taken our sin upon himself so that we may have freedom. He is willing. Are you? Let's pray. Jesus, you interacted with a variety of people in your ministry, healing a variety of people out of love for them, compassion for them, out of an extension of your authority as the God-man, using language, using touch. And so, Father, maybe when we look at these healing accounts, not just from the standpoint of, man, what a great story that is. Man, it was so encouraging to see that the leper could go back to his home to worship. What a wonderful thing it was that the centurion cared so much about his servant that he put his job on the line to ask Jesus for something. And how beautiful it is and simple it is that Jesus would walk into a home he was so familiar with to make an unclean fever clean. And in all these individual lives, they're restored back into the communities they cared so much about. One to worship, one back to work in his livelihood, one back to serving in her home. Do we have the same faith? Can we trust you with our brokenness, our diseases, the cancer we have, the relational tension we face, maybe emotional wounds that go back 30, 40, 50 years ago that we just haven't dealt with because we are ashamed. Lord Jesus, give us the faith to say you can. Ultimately, all in accordance with your Father's will. So we thank you for this great example of faith, of trust, of leaning into the authority of your word. May we be those types of people this week.